And now, with apologies to Garrison Keillor. Well, it's been a quiet week in Washington, D.C., my hometown, out there on the edge of the country. It's been warm. Chuck Grassley ran to his refrigerator's freezer on Wednesday to make sure he still had proof that global warming was a hoax. His discovery was a mixed blessing, of course. The freezer was still working as it had been since 1958. He didn't buy the freezer then, he's just notoriously cheap. He's been using that freezer to disprove scientists since 1983, but it kind of rubs him raw that a scientist invented refrigeration. Uppity scientists. But you keep a fridge that old because, at the very least, it still leaks dangerous coolants into the atmosphere, and Chuck's heard that every little bit helps. Lindsey Graham has been waiting by the phone, and so has been missing the leaves as they turn up and down the Potomac. He also hasn't seen a single protester outside of his house, holding signs that remind him of all the terrible things he's done, shouting slogans about all the terrible things he's done. Lindsey's reputation is fairly well known by now as the rabid chihuahua of American politics. Probably the only person who isn't aware of it is Lindsey himself. He doesn't want to know. In moments of great personal ennui, he heads down to his basement and asks Alex Hyde White in his cage down there what people must think. "What must people think, Alex Hyde White?" he asks. And if Alex is conscious, if he's been given water that week, he'll beg for release. And Lindsey will think that's a proposition and laugh with that incredibly manly laugh that only he believes he has. The Supreme Court witnessed the swearing in of Brett Kavanaugh this week, and for his part, Brett Kavanaugh was happy to join the 8 other white men on the court, to join that proud tradition of white men holding judgment over a white nation. Ruth Bader Ginsburg found Brett's belief odd, to say the least. After all, she's been on the court for many years and was fairly confident that she was, in fact, a woman. Sotomayor wasn't even white. But this was the world Brett had come from. This was how he was raised. He grew up amongst white men, was educated by white men, raised by white men, employed by white men. To be honest, I don't think he could see the difference between white men and non-white men. And don't get me started on the subject of women. His wife, Ashley, has tried to explain to him, but he calls her Ash. Sometimes he calls her pal or buddy. When she tried to use logic, telling him that only women could bear children, Brett wouldn't hear of it and ran from the room crying. To be honest, his 3 sexual experiences in life were shameful moments he would rather not consider. 2 were with that dude Ash, who later told him that they had somehow bore children. Probably a homo plot from the liberal court, giving more rights to gays than men had. Could men bear children? No. But have gay sex with a guy named Ash, and next thing you know... That was probably why he didn't talk to his roommate that often. Actually, Brett didn't talk to too many people. Or, I should say, not many people could understand a word that he said. Which is unfortunate, especially when you consider that he only speaks one word. The millions of people around the country and around the world who watched his testimony before the Senate probably thought they heard a fairly poorly spoken 100 or so word vocabulary, but that was due to some incredibly expensive translation software developed by white men, Brett was certain, because only they could translate Brett's one word. And his one word was this: beer. That's what Brett was saying to the court. Beer, 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 beer. He might have sounded like a cheap alcoholic, but pass that through the translating software, and it comes out sounding very much like an overprivileged white boy child. So America really did have a choice. Understanding these key facts about Brett Kavanaugh, that he sees everyone as white men, and that he's been engaged in a self-destructive love affair with the cheapest Pilsner ever made, Mickey's Big Mouth, can actually clear up much of the confusion surrounding his coronation as judge. For instance, that time at the party with Christine Ford wasn't a sexual assault, after all. He thought Christine was just another one of the guys that he was hazing. Sure, he's never actually had sex with a girl, and as far as he knew, he'd never seen a girl. And though he wasn't about to have sex with another guy, he was so drunk and horned up, any port in any storm was probably where he would eventually be heading. This guy, Chris, was just as good a port as any. And when he exploded on the Senate floor about beer,
I like beer. I really like beer. I really. You got any beer? I want beer. Give me beer. Brett Muster must feed. Roar!
that was actually the translator breaking down for a minute. It runs on a PC. It can only take so much. Ruth Bader Ginsburg had this all figured out, but then she is Ruth Bader Ginsburg. What she didn't realize was that when she took Brett down with several well-phrased digs about his hair, about his schoolboy's hair, about his cheap supercuts hair, she didn't realize that Brett was thinking that Babe Ruth, that's how he thinks of her, as Babe Ruth. I don't see any resemblance either, but that's what he went with. He was thinking that Babe Ruth had a stupid haircut for a white man, too. Most white men have stupid haircuts, according to Brett. Stormy Daniel, that movie star pal of the president, has a stupid haircut. Mike Huckabee Sanders has a stupid haircut. And that white singer Trump had over to the White House this week, Kenny West, has the dumbest haircut of any white guy Brett has ever seen. But that's what makes Kenny West so good, because he's so very white. Which is why Brett was able to stand in front of his best buddy Ash and their 2 sons and take his oath of office this week. Beer, 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 Trump. And that's the news from Washington, D.C., where all the women are wrong, all the men are crooked, and all the children are screwed.